everyone, and thank you so much for attending the Junior League of Springfield's first Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Conference, Taking Inventory and Making Change. I want to take just a minute and thank everyone who's helped us make this conference a reality. A special thanks to AJLI and CFO for sponsoring this conference. Thank you to the Junior League leadership for supporting our efforts to make DEI a priority in our league and in our community. Thank you to the JLS D&I Task Force and to all of our Junior League of Springfield members. I also want to take time to thank the community partners that have helped promote this event and those of you that are attending with us today. And last but not least, thank you all for taking time out of your day to help us learn and make our community a more inclusive place to live. For those of you that don't know, the Junior League of Springfield is an organization of women committed to promoting volunteerism, developing the potential of women, and improving our community through the effective action and leadership of our trained volunteers. So now we have a video to show you that gives you a little more insight to who we are.
Daughters, sisters, wives, and mothers.
We're friends, family, neighbors, and community partners.
We are working women with different talents, skills, and capabilities.
We are over 500 members strong,
with nearly 200 active members,
and over 300 sustaining members.
Together, since 1959, our mission has been to make Springfield a better place to live, work, and play.
The Junior League of Springfield is an organization of women committed to promoting volunteerism, developing the potential of women, and improving our community with effective action and leadership through trained volunteers.
We have given over $4 million in grants to fund community projects throughout Springfield.
The Junior League was instrumental in the development of projects and programs since our inception, and every one of them has benefited our community. Tonight, I'm at the Discovery Center of Springfield, one of our signature projects. Other projects include Isabel's House, KOZK, the Girls Club, which is now the Boys and Girls Club of Springfield, Leadership Springfield, Team Court, the Tooth Truck, the Community Focus Report, and so many more.
And we have worked together with local organizations like Big Brothers Big Sisters, I Pour Life, Foster, Adopt, Connect, Girls on the Run, Laura's Home, OTC Middle College, Safe to Sleep, and Empower Abilities.
Not to mention, we've given more than 1.3 million hours of volunteer service to help make Springfield a greater place. The Junior League of Springfield gives women the training tools they need to develop the confidence to continue a lifelong journey of volunteering.
Over the last half century, we've accomplished some great things, but there's still much more for us to do.
Join us, support us, volunteer with us.
The Junior League of Springfield, 417 strong and still making a difference.
We are Junior League! We are Junior League! We are Junior League!
Hi, I'm Rachel Furman, and I'm currently serving as the Junior League of Springfield's Diversity and Inclusion Task Force co-chair with Allison Robertson. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're really looking forward to it. As the Junior League of Springfield, we wanted to give you some background information on our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts before we dive into the conference. So we have made the commitment to becoming a more inclusive and diverse organization. So during the 2017-2018 league year, we adopted the following diversity and inclusion statement. The Junior League of Springfield welcomes all women who value our mission. We are committed to inclusive environments of individuals, organizations, and communities. During the 2018-2019 league year, our board of directors completed an initial DEI organizational assessment, and they established a diversity and inclusion task force. During the 2019-2020 league year, the task force began the work of identifying a starting point for the Junior League. A membership DEI survey was conducted, and the survey results were shared with our board of directors. Our task force partnered with Francine Pratt of Pratt Consulting and one of our featured speakers today to create a diversity and inclusion plan for our organization. We worked with Francine to create a series of workshops for our membership that would help us work toward increasing our league's cultural consciousness. Our initial workshop we held in February of 2020, and then we continued remotely through March of this year, so last month. During our current 2020-2021 league year, we've continued our workshop work with Francine, as well as held a few events for our members, including a conversation with the Springfield Chief of Police, and we held a joint conversation on race with JLS past President Krista Hogan and her husband, City Councilman Abe McGull. So that's been our journey to date. So we are so excited you're here with us today, and we look forward to working towards a more inclusive Springfield with all of you. So when our task force began discussing a format for this conference, we decided to focus on three main areas: the personal, the group and organizational, and the community. We felt that these three areas best captured how we interact with each other, and we wanted to begin by learning how to take a current diversity and inclusion inventory at each of these levels, and then how to authentically incorporate what we learned today into each one. So we're going to start off by looking at ourselves and delving into our personal inventory. So to help us with this, we'd like to introduce Vicki Clark of Vicki Clark Consulting. Vicki is based in Memphis, Tennessee. She has devoted the past 30 years of her career to building the capacity of organizations and individuals while inspiring community and business leaders to take action. We are so excited for you to hear from Vicki today. She is a very inspiring lady. Unfortunately, Vicki couldn't be with us in person due to a conflict, but she graciously recorded a session for us, and Allison will get us started.
Hello, everybody. My name is Vicki Clark, and it is such an honor and a joy to join you today as we talk about some really important issues. I love the theme of today's sessions, taking inventory and making change. And I'm going to talk to you a lot about my own personal inventory and some of the changes that I have made in my life and my outlook, not only in the past year, but throughout my life. My name is Vicki Clark. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. And again, I'm so proud to be part of this today. I would like to start today's session with a land acknowledgement. I respectfully acknowledge that I am on the traditional ancestral lands of the Chickasaw people. The process of knowing and acknowledging the land where I stand is a way of honoring and expressing gratitude for the ancestral Chickasaw people who were on this land before us. And for that, we owe a debt of gratitude to the indigenous peoples who came before us. Without them, Americas would not exist. Thank you. This idea of taking it, one of the things that you've seen is one of the changes that I've made in my life. One of the things I've been doing is learning more about indigenous people, because like most people my age, I wasn't told the truth about indigenous people, about their tribes, about their culture, and about their history. And so I have learned that I need to be respectful and I need to honor those who came before me. And so now every meeting, every session that I'm a part of, I begin with a land acknowledgement. So that is part of one of the changes that I have made in my journey, personal journey, to learn more about indigenous people, and the journey continues. You know, it's very difficult to take a look at ourselves, because often when we look at ourselves, we don't like what we see. And in the past year and a half, to be honest, beginning with when Mr. George Floyd was killed, this conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and access has been something that so many of us have been rethinking and revisiting. And when it says the journey began with the end in mind, the end in mind for me is that I want to be as culturally competent as I can be. I want to be culturally conscious. I want to be sensitive, and I want to learn about those who are unlike me, always with respect, always with empathy. And so that's the way I want the end of this journey to come. And it never ends. You know, I'm thinking of this as not a moment in time, but this is a movement. Don't know if you can tell, but I'm an older baby boomer. I grew up here in Memphis, Tennessee during the segregation era. And we'll talk to you a little bit about that. I never thought we would be at this place, at this journey, at this age in my life, and at this time in this country. So there never is an end. The journey continues as we learn and as we grow and as we evolve. Let's keep going. Well, it is about the journey. The first picture you see is my kindergarten graduation picture. As I said to you, I was born in the 1950s here in segregated Memphis, Tennessee. My family lived in the Foot Homes housing complex, housing project, if you will. And I went to the Foot Homes kindergarten. I went, the next picture, I think I was 4th grade, and I went to segregated schools up until high school. And I got a really good education. I might have had books that belonged to somebody named Jennifer or Kelly, but the teachers really cared, and they taught us, and they weren't just teaching us about reading, writing. They were teaching us how to be good people. They were telling us what the world was saying that we could not be. They were telling us that we could be anything that we wanted to be. And that wasn't what the world was telling me, because when I would go downtown at this age with my mother down on Main Street to buy school clothes or Easter dress, the water fountains there were 2 water fountains. I remember once saying to my mother, I want some water. And she said, we don't drink out of those water fountains. And I said, but it's 2 of them there. She said, we don't drink out of those water fountains. We'll get water when we get home. Well, as a little girl in the 50s, you didn't talk back to your mom. There wasn't any bottled water back then. And my mother was clear that this was not part of what we were going to participate in. Then as I became a teenager, again, the messages from my teachers, but always from my family, was that you can do whatever you want to do. You need to work hard, and believe it or not, you got to be better than everybody else. In my world at that time, there were only 2 types of people, Negroes and white people. The good news is that my family was not, there were a few white people in our lives, very different from most kids who grew up in the 50s and the 60s in Memphis. I realize now the way my parents had grown up, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but they did not teach me to hate. They taught me to love. They taught me to care. They taught me to be open, but they did keep telling me that you have to always be the best that you can be. I had opportunities as a teenager that maybe others who looked like me did not have. I had an opportunity to go, believe it or not, to New York City with a busload of kids, a busload of Negro kids, to the 1965 World's Fair. That was unheard of at the time. We stayed in hotels. That was unheard of at the time. We made the newspaper. Negro kids go to World's Fair in New York. That was a privilege and an opportunity. And so many people, I got to see things and do things. But will tell you what they said to us. You are representing everybody. You are representing all of the Negro children. You are representing your family. You are representing your school. You will act with decorum, you will be respectful, and I know that sounds very heavy, but we really were, because a lot of people hadn't seen people who look like us in hotels and in restaurants, and a whole busload of us. Unbelievable. And I'm so grateful for those teachers who were willing to go out on a limb and say, yes, we can take a busload of Negro kids all the way from Memphis up to Niagara Falls and back down. And we can show them the World's Fair, and we can show them Washington, D.C., and we can show them Natural Bridge, and we can show them that there is a world outside of where they are and that they fit into this world. Well, the next picture is my first business trip. I'd never been on a business trip before. I was probably about 27 years old. I worked for a major defense contractor outside of Chicago, Illinois, and I worked in human resources. And they said, we're sending you to California, which was where headquarters, corporate was, for training. Sending me to California. I didn't understand about travel vouchers. I didn't understand any of that. But again, with the help of allies and another woman, I was schooled, as they say. And again, carrying that load that I'm representing, because when I walked into that room, I was the only one who looked like me. First of all, most of them were men. The few women that they were white women. And I was the only woman of color in that room at that time, representing they had plenty of installations of this defense contractor. And I was the only one representing Chicago, the Chicago area site. And I was the only woman of color. So my life's journey has been a very interesting journey. As a teenager, where I sit now, I am back in Memphis. I grew up in this house. Dr. King was assassinated 15 minutes from here at what was then called the Lorraine Motel, which is now called the National Civil Rights Museum. Devastating. I went to school with some of the kids whose fathers were sanitation workers. That's why Dr. King came to Memphis, to ask for rights, to demand rights for Negro sanitation workers. I think we thought that when the Civil Rights Bill passed, when the Voting Rights Bill passed, when accommodations opened up, that people would see that we're all the same and that life would be very, very different. Oh, life was different. And I could go to different schools. I went to a large university in Missouri. I went to University of Missouri, went to restaurants and hotels and all those type of things. But how do we find ourselves back here? Because what we did not do as people of conscience, not just people of color, as people of conscience, we didn't keep the movement moving. And I think that's what has to be different now. And did I think I'd be talking about this at this stage and age in my life? No, but I'm determined. I'm determined that I'm going to do whatever I can and use my journey as a story, as an example, to hopefully help somebody else. So let's keep going. You know, this whole idea of we're all on a learning journey. And as I said to you, I've been learning about Indigenous people. I've been learning so much more about gender identity and about the LGBTQ plus groups. I've been learning so much more about cultures. I've been learning about Ramadan. I've been learning so much. But for all of us, there's some things that we need to unlearn. And most of the time, transformation is often more about unlearning than learning. You know why this journey has been so difficult for people in the past year? Many people say to me, you know, I'm willing to learn, but I was raised a certain way and I was told certain things. And now I'm confronting those things and I'm finding that some of those things necessarily have not served me well. And other people are saying, they don't want to be a traitor to their family. They don't want to disrespect their parents. But the whole idea is we can't change what we refuse to confront. And I will tell you, I'm not proud of it. I sat in the movies on Saturday and watched the Westerns, and I cheered for the Cowboys because I didn't know any better. Does that make me feel good now that I know about what have happened to Indigenous people in this country? No, but I didn't know any better. So I'm confronting that issue. I love old movies, but there are certain movies that I can't watch now because I realized that it wasn't valid. It wasn't true. The other thing that I've had to unlearn is that I still got a lot of work to do. We all have unconscious bias. We all have unconscious bias. And we all have to work. Sometimes people think that people of color don't have unconscious bias. We do. We all microaggress other people. We don't intend to, but we do. And so a lot of what I think in my life is this unlearning that I don't know everything and that I need to continue on this journey and I show up in the world as a learner. So I'm unlearning a lot and I'm learning a lot and trying to confront many of the things that I was taught or that the world tried to teach me. So I'm confronting my own stuff and we all got to look at our own stuff. What do you have to unlearn? That'd be a great question. I think it's important that this idea of see me for who I am. You know, we went through this melting pot stage where we weren't going to see differences. We weren't going to see race. We weren't going to see gender. I tell you that's one of the things that I had to unlearn. But you know why we went through the melting pot era? Because when you melt everybody down, all you get is a glob of gray. And people didn't want to be different because different meant that you weren't going to be treated as well. Different meant that opportunities weren't open to you. And so what you wanted to do was to blend in. The idea is right now, we need to see everybody for who they are. I want you to see me as a 60-year-old plus African-American woman with crazy curly hair who is left-handed. That's who I am. And I want you to see me for that. And I'm proud to be that. I'm not ashamed to be that woman. Many, many years ago, people were ashamed to be people of color. They were ashamed to be Negroes. They were ashamed to be Asian, ashamed to be gay, ashamed. So this idea of we're not going to see you for who you are. And then people asking questions, things like, well, what are you? And what do your people think about that? Believe it or not, at my first job in St. Louis, Missouri, someone said to me, it was during the Vietnam War, early 70s, what do Black people think about the Vietnam War? Like all Black people thought the same thing about any issue, that we were a monolith. The strange thing was that the first thing I thought was that I should know. And let me tell you about the person who asked. He wasn't a bad person. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was curious. He had never been around anybody like me before. There weren't just a few of us at this publishing company. And he was asking out of sincerity. And at first I thought I should know. And then I said to him, I don't know. I like to use humor. I said, I didn't go to the last meeting. And he looked at me in all sincerity. And he said, oh, there are meetings where you all go and talk about these things? And I said, no. And all Black people don't think the same thing about anything. He was curious. He had never been around Black people. He knew very little, if anything, about us. And so the idea that he was trying to ask questions that could have been pretty uncomfortable for some people. Then this idea of, people talking to people, you're really pretty for someone so dark. I realized that I have light skin privilege. Some of you may be saying, well, what is that? My parents were both dark skinned people. And I understood very early in life that they were treated much, much differently than light skinned people. And I love what my parents did. They did not make me bitter. They helped me to understand what their journey was so that we didn't know the word ally then. My mother said, you have to respect everybody. You have to respect everybody. And you have to understand that everybody has worth. But there are people who don't think that you have worth. And she said, there are definitely people who don't think that your dad and I have worth. They think you have more worth than we do. And I said, why? And she said, because you're lighter skinned. And I said, what does that have to do with anything? I'm a kid. And she said, you know, that's what the world thinks. So the thing that darker skinned people of many, many ethnicities, you're really pretty for someone so dark. You don't act like a normal Black person. What does a normal Black person act? Why do you sound so white? I've had that. I've had that. Or, you know, I'm not Muslim, but people, you're not like other Muslim people. Other people asking people who English may not be their first language, where are you from? No, where are you really from? And then with different names, your name is too hard to pronounce. Someone once said that she was told that she was very lucky that her parents gave her a white sounding name. She's a Black woman. She was lucky that her parents gave her a white sounding name because it'd be a lot easier for her to navigate the world like that. We have to see people for who they are. And we have to be okay with who they are. And guess what? We have to respect who they are and let them tell their stories. Let's keep going. This whole idea about this dangers of this I don't see color mentality. First of all, you can't fix something that you can't see. You say, wait a minute, are we talking about fixing people of color? No, we're talking about fixing what we think. You know, this idea of I don't see color allows us to ignore the complexities of racial issues because we just melted everybody down. You're not different. We're all the same. We're also not actively dismantling our own prejudices, and we all have them. It also, when we say I don't see color, it minimizes the struggles that people of color have had, not just in today's society, but, you know, in this country since 1619. And then prior to that, indigenous people. And it limits our ability to appreciate individualism. And I think that's the most important thing, is that we have to appreciate individualism. I'm going to be honest with you. I raised my oldest son with this, we don't see color, because that was where we were in the world at that time. And I'm not sure that that served him very well, because it is so important for all of us to have the ability to appreciate differences and to appreciate individualism. So that's one of the things that I've been unlearning. So let's keep going. You know, the reality is when we talked about this melting pot idea, when we melt everybody down, it's more like we're a tapestry. And I love what Maya Angelou said. She says, we all should know that diversity makes for a rich tapestry. And we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter what their color. And a tapestry, you can see all of the colors, you can see all of the fabrics, you can see that the fabrics are different, you can see the thicknesses are different, they're made out of different things, but every piece of the tapestry belongs. And if you start pulling the threads out, or if you start pulling pieces of it, the whole thing falls apart. And that's what happens in society. That's what happens in our communities. When we start, well, we don't need these people and we're not going to recognize these people and we're just going to blend all of these people in and we're not going to count these people, everything comes apart. And we don't have a sense of community. We use that word community all the time. Community is not geography. Community is the ability to be able to come together and commune with people and be with people. And it's okay for them to be them. You know, again, you know, going to school in the late 50s and all that, this idea was Crayola had one color called flesh. And it didn't look like the flesh of a lot of the people that I knew. I like these crayons where flesh comes in all different colors, tapestries come in all different colors, all different backgrounds, all different origins. And that is really the reality of who we are and who we have been. And we are finally coming to grips with this idea that different is okay. Let's keep going. This idea of what is normal, this was the original flesh color. And yes, crayons did cost 35 cents a box. And you think you're acting normal when you're in your culture. I'm left-handed. Most of you have right-handed privilege. I navigate the world very differently. There were no left-handed scissors when I was growing up. So it's very normal for me to do things very differently than right-handed people do. But my idea is that the way I live my life and the things that I think and the things that I believe are not necessarily normal for everybody. And I need to be okay with that. And I have to accept that. And that is also part of my journey. And so this idea of we need to throw out what's normal, because what's normal is what's normal for everybody in their own culture. Let's keep going. Well, what have I learned? What I have learned? I've learned a lot, because I think having the time and being forced to sit during this past year or so and try to reconcile all the horrors that have gone on. These horrors never stopped, but we've just been able to see them. We've been able to see these horrors. The horrors never stopped. I've gone to the Civil Rights Museum and other museums, and you see, newspaper clippings of Black people hanging from a tree. And it was like it was a picnic that people took their children to. I have learned that there are people who dehumanize folks who look like me, that they don't think of us as human beings. And that's why they can torture us. That's why they can kill us. That's why they can ignore us. That's why they can try to destroy us. That's not something that I really am comfortable with, but I have learned that that is true. It does not make me bitter. I hope it makes me better, and it makes me a better ally, and it makes me a better advocate, and it makes me use my voice, and it makes me use my privilege. So I have learned and come to grips with a lot of very uncomfortable things that I already knew, but that I really hadn't focused on. Let's keep going. This is so complicated. Again, I'm a Southerner and we go straight to race, but it's so much more complicated than that. It's gender, it's ethnicity, it's national origin, it's age, which I'm really coming to grips with as an aging person in America, which is a very youth-oriented culture. I see how the world treats me. I see that systems were not designed for me. And then we look at marital status and organizational role and mental health. And so glad that we can finally start talking about mental health. And religious beliefs are not religious beliefs. Again, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. The first thing people want to know is, what church do you go to? They want to know that before they want to know your name.
That would probably.
And there are people who don't have a belief system. And you know what? That's okay. And there are people who have a belief system that's very different from mine. And that's okay. And socioeconomic status. Oh my gosh. How do we demonize the poor? How do we talk about people as if they can change their own circumstances? We think different. We learn different. We communicate different. Even geography. I grew up in South Memphis, and I used to hear people talk about folks in North Memphis. Memphis is not that big, and one street separates South Memphis from North Memphis, believe it or not. And I would hear people, other Negroes, say, all the people in North Memphis crazy. And I thought to myself, how can all the people in North Memphis, are they all crazy? I didn't know many people from North Memphis. We still talk about Negro people. I didn't know many people, but there was that whole North Memphis, South Memphis thing. And I would bet in your communities, you have the same thing, this whole geographic location piece, and definitely education. And we value people or devalue people based on education and language. People who English is not their first language, personal habits, and even recreational habits. You say, well, wait a minute, what does that have to do with anything? Women in corporate America learned in the late 70s and the early 80s, some did, that they needed to learn how to play golf. That playing golf and going to these, what they used to call charity golf tournaments, where they would get FaceTime with the CEOs and the CFOs, would give them an opportunity that women did not have. So that the CEO or the head of the company or the owner would get to know who you were. Men had those opportunities. Women didn't. And so the idea that women started taking up golf as a as a strategy to move up the corporate ladder. And we are not even going to begin to talk about political ideology and even marital status. I'm a divorced person. I always wonder why they have divorced on there. If I get sick, don't call him. I'm not mad at him. So I usually just check single. And then people look at me very sad. The idea that, oh my gosh, she's a single person at her age. So this is very complicated. And when you think about, it wasn't complicated for me when I was a little girl. You is Black or you a Negro. This whole thing makes it even more complicated. And that's why I say this is a learning journey, and it is not a moment. This is a movement, and we're learning more and more and more about all of these different areas and the way that we are different. And that is okay that we are different. It is okay that we're different, and we need to value these differences. Let's keep going. Diversity is a fact. I really think the conversation around diversity is we just need to own it. We're different. If you've seen one woman, you've seen one woman. If you've seen one Black person, you've seen one Black person. Equity is a choice. We used to think that equality was what it was, what we needed, but it's equity. Equity means idea that different people need different things at different times. And that if we view everything through a lens of equity, and equity is a fairly new concept for me, believe it or not. So I'm learning more about equity and because everything that I was taught was equality, but realizing that we're all different. And inclusion is an action. It's not just being there. In my first job, they said to me, you probably want to lose that Southern accent. And it was in St. Louis. You probably want to lose that Southern accent. You probably want to do something with that crazy curly hair. This was told by HR. They could tell you that. It was called coaching. If you want to be successful here, they said you probably don't want to wear light colors because you won't look very professional. You'll look too girly. Or you probably don't want to put pictures of your family up because people will think you're on some kind of mommy track or something like that. And you know what? Try not to act too Black. These are the way I think you can be successful here. They didn't want me. They wanted me to turn into them. And I worked really hard trying to prove that I belonged. And yeah, I had big curlers and I slept in big giant curlers in my hair. I wore dark suits and all those types of things. All the things to try to be included. Inclusion means the system has to change to be inclusive for everybody so that everybody belongs. That people should not have to assimilate into a system in order to be successful, whatever that means, in order to be welcomed. And belonging is an outcome because we all want to belong. Whether we're at work, whether we're in the community, whether we're in an organization, we all want to belong, meaning that my voice, my power, me, as I am, just as I am, that I belong. And I don't have to morph into anybody else to be included and to really belong. So I've been learning a lot in my journey about equity and about true inclusion, because I know what it's like not to be included and to feel like that I was not enough and that I had to be somebody that I wasn't. Let's keep going. This idea, when I think about my parents were born in the late 20s. And when you look at the first dot, my parents were the red, yellow, and the blue dots. The whole world was in the green. Everything was going on. I'm not even sure if the people in the green knew that my parents existed, except in certain roles. And so then the yellow and the green, the yellow and the blue and the red people said, we're going to show the greens. And again, this is just me pulling this in my head, that we can do things. So you saw businesses start up. You saw schools start up. You saw clubs and groups and professional associations of people of color, because we couldn't get in to the others, and trying to create a world that had value for us and for people like me and for anybody who was othered. And I think the whole goal was to prove to the green people, the people in the green, where it was all happening, that we could do it and that we belonged inside. Because a lot of what I heard about growing up as a child was about integration. If we can just get in, if we can just get in. Well, once we got in, it wasn't enough, because in order to be successful, same thing that happened at the job, and for many people who are othered, it was like, you're in, but now you got to turn into a green dot. You can't be your yellow dot, red dot, blue dot self. You can't. True inclusion is that I can be me, you can be you, and we all bring something to the table, and that we all belong. And that idea of value and practice of ensuring that everybody feels like they belong. And that means changing many of our structures and changing our systems, because most of them were not designed for any of us who were othered or designed by us. And so it's many organizations must be rethinking. And I know you're going to have a session coming up about organizations, and that's going to be really important, because it really is about creating more inclusive environments where everybody feels like that they belong. Let's keep going. So this idea of why am I speaking or why am I not speaking? I didn't even know how to do Facebook Live a year ago. My maiden name is Floyd. After I've done diversity and inclusion and training for many years, but it was soft. It was soft. And I am a call-in person. I'm not a call-out person. But when I looked at what happened with Mr. Floyd, that's my maiden name. That could have been my father. I have 2 adult sons. It could have been a lot of people that I know. My father's life was threatened when he was on a bus in Oxford, Mississippi. He was working. He was a bartender, and he was working on a party bus that had taken some people from Memphis to a football game down at Ole Miss. And whatever happened, Ole Miss lost to, at that time, which was Memphis State, which was unheard of. And somehow some people saw a few Black faces on the bus, my father and the other waiters and bartenders, and they started to rock the bus and throw sticks at the bus. And the people on the bus, who were all white, said to my father and others, "Get under the seat. Get under the seat." And the bus took off. My father told me that story. My father could have been killed that day. I think I felt like that I had to start speaking up. I've always, my mom was fierce. She always spoke up about things. Because I believe that the day you don't speak up for the things that matter to you is the day that your freedom truly ends. I happen to be someone with a bit of a platform. And I had to make a decision last year as to how am I going to use this platform? How I can keep doing the things I've been doing, but I felt like that I needed to speak up because it was time. It was way past time. And to speak up in a different way and to tell my story in a different way and to hopefully to add value to some things. Let's keep going. This is how I use my privilege. When I think about it, we use our privilege. Oh my gosh, this is the biggest word now. Nobody wants to talk about privilege, and everybody's running around talking about how they didn't have privilege and how they grew up on a farm and they only had 1 pair of shoes. Privilege is not about that. Privilege is about the way systems are designed. And when a system isn't designed for you, you don't have any privilege. It is awkward to talk about privilege. Many people avoid it. People are reluctant, and this whole denial thing. And then some people just ignorant and diversion. Let's not talk about this. I don't want to talk about this. And then there's silence. I'm not going to talk about privilege. And then the idea of a lot of people got a lot carrying a lot of stuff in their trunk that they haven't been open with about their own personal journey. If you're the elephant, you pretty much got the whole room. If you're the mouse, you got to always know where the elephant is because you always on guard. There's a privilege There is a privilege to having power. There is a privilege to having a voice. There is a privilege to being recognized. So how are we using our privilege? And again, I've had to rethink, talking about my personal journey, about how I use my privilege this year. And I'm using it to speak up and out about things that I hadn't really talked openly about in many, many years. So let's keep going. How are you going to use your privilege when you think about your own personal journey? When the Black Lives Matter movement started a few years ago, the term made me uncomfortable. I'm not talking about an organization. I will be honest with you. You said, told you about my personal journey. I'm telling you my own stuff. I was uncomfortable with the term Black Lives Matter because I thought at the time that it would be more divisive than bringing us together. But when I started to understand and I started to think about it, and some of you may say, oh my gosh, you're a Black woman who grew up during the civil rights era. How could you not embrace that? It was hard for me to embrace that language. Not anymore. But I will tell you this, I thought to myself, if I say Black Lives Matter, I'm a consultant. Are people going to think she's gone all radical on us? We don't want her anymore. But I realized that if I don't say that Black Lives Matter, I'm not being true to myself. I'm not being true to my heritage. I'm not being true to people who came before me and all the people who have died and the people who worked so hard to make sure that my life matters. And that it's important for me to make sure that other folks know that Black lives matter. This isn't saying that other people's lives don't matter, but because Black people and people of color have been dehumanized for so long, our lives didn't really matter. And so that's another thing that I have learned is that I definitely believe Black Lives Matter. I'm comfortable talking about it. I defend my right to say it. I am not endorsing an organization. I am stating a fact. And until we change our systems, until we get our minds right, as my grandmother used to say, get your mind right, get these systems right, until everybody understands that Black Lives Matter. I spoke to a woman who is a Native American advocate. And I said to her, what is it that you want others to know about Indigenous people? And she said that we're here, that we're here. We're not invisible, that we're here and that we count and that we're important. And that shook me to my core. But I totally understood what she said. So I am very comfortable with saying Black Lives Matter. And that's part of my new truth. Let's keep going. I keep learning, and I'm learning that I am enough. I don't need to change my hair. I don't need to pretend that I'm younger. I don't need to, I can be okay with my Southern accent, which has definitely come back. Whew, I can breathe. And I'm still a learner. I'm learning about all the different pronouns. I'm learning about gender fluidity. I'm learning so much. Do I make mistakes? Yes. Yes. I'm learning about cultures, as I said, that I didn't know. We know that many of the imageries are changing on products. Aunt Jemima is gone. Uncle Ben will be gone from the rice. The man on the cream of wheat box will be gone. I didn't know he had a name. His name was Rastus. He's going to be gone. Miss Butterworth is probably going to be gone. But then I was reading something about Eskimo pie, thinking about changing the name of the product. And I thought to myself, Eskimo pie, what's wrong with that? And I said, do what you tell other people to do. Look it up. I hear my third grade teacher, look it up. And when I learned that Indigenous people, the names they were given, the titles that they were given by their colonizers. And they were totally disrespectful. And that the word Eskimo can translate into barbarian, it translates into a person with no spirit, with no soul. And I was shocked. And again, found myself ashamed. Wow. I totally understood about Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben and Rastus and all of them, because that was part of my culture. And I understood how demeaning those images were. And then to think that, wow, okay, Eskimo, not a good thing, not a good name. So I'm a learner, and that I am enough as long as I continue to learn and be on this journey. I'm learning about all of, we have 5 generations in play. We have World War II people, we have baby boomers, we have Generation X, Generation Y, and Generation Z, all in the workplace and all in play and all on this journey. And we have got to learn about each other. And I'm learning that I have as much to learn from a Generation Z woman or man as she or he has to learn from me. And I have to put some of my baby boomer stuff behind me and be open to learning and growing. Let's keep going. This is from a U2 song. I'm more than you know. I'm more than you see here. I'm more than you let me be. I'm more than you know, a body and a soul. You don't see me, but you will. I am not invisible. This idea of people as invisible or people not counting is so disrespectful. And we all are more than we know. And people are not only their gender. They're not only their ethnicity. They're not only their tattoos. They're not only their age. They're not only their marital status. We're all so much more than that. That is part of who we are, and we are proud of all of that. But the idea is that we are so much more. And if we would give each other the opportunity to broaden our circles, we used to hang out with people who are like us. We like people who are like us. But the idea is we had learned so much from people who are not like us. And the idea is to understand that everybody is more than you can see. That when you see me, you have to know that there's so much more to me than just this exterior shell. And that once you discard me because of my age or because of my race or because of my abilities or my lack of abilities, that you're missing out on the essence of all that really is me. And I would be doing the same thing to you. And that no one is invisible and no one should feel invisible. Let's keep going. Well, representation matters. I got that doll for Christmas. I got that doll for Christmas 2020. When I was a little girl, back in the day, as they say, there weren't anybody who looked like me in books, magazines, on television, anywhere. I didn't see me. There was a show that used to come on Sunday night called Ed Sullivan. And every now and then, Ed Sullivan would have Black performers on, people like Nat King Cole and Sammy Davis Jr. and, Eartha Kitt and Pearl Bailey. If you don't know those names, Google them. And my grandmother would get on the phone and she would call everybody she knew and say, there's some colored people on TV, and everybody would tune in. But we didn't see ourselves. So I never had a black doll. The only black dolls that they had when I was a little girl were those pickaninny dolls. And I'm telling you, my mama wasn't having that. Well, I had a lot of dolls, but didn't any of them look like me. So this concept of what's beautiful and what's pretty and what's acceptable. So I was talking about this, about why representation matters and why you have to be able to, if you can see it, you can be it, and why it's important to a group that I was working with, a company. And so for Christmas, this big box comes. And I'm like, Amazon has made a huge mistake. And then I open it and I see this doll. I'm like, a doll? Why not? Oh, somebody's missing a doll. Some child's gonna miss their doll. And it had a note in there that said, Merry Christmas. We didn't want you to ever have another Christmas when you didn't have a doll who looked like you. So I have my doll and I love her. I'm probably going to donate her. I haven't given her away yet. But again, no books that we had looked at had any pictures of anybody like me in them. I couldn't see myself on television. I couldn't see myself in magazines. The good news is there was something called Johnson Publishing Company in Chicago, and they put magazines out called Jet and Ebony. Jet was a weekly news magazine, and Ebony was monthly. And thank goodness my parents took Ebony and Jet, because that was where I saw people who looked like me. And then there was a newspaper here called the Tri-State Defender. And I could see people who look like me. But the real world, people who look like me didn't really exist. So representation really does matter. So I just wanted to share my dog with you. She's part of my journey too. This isn't easy. This is not easy. I had a go around with a friend of mine the other day about tattoos. We're about the same age. It's like, I just don't understand these people with all these tattoos. And I said, were you scared by a tattoo at an early age? Does somebody having a tattoo means they're not going to be a good employee, that they're not a good person? What is this about? And that's kind of how I approach things, is to ask questions. And we're each a work in progress. And we're never too old to change, evolve, to grow. And some changes look negative on the surface, but you'll soon realize that space is being created in your life for something new to emerge. And what's being created in my life, this new emerging, is speaking my truth, trying to ensure equity for others, and trying to look at everything through a lens of equity and not through whatever privilege I may have, learning more about my own culture and learning more about other cultures, and speaking up and speaking out and challenging things when I think that people are not recognizing their own stuff, and always being aware of my own implicit bias and always trying to learn and wanting to be an ally. As an older person, I want to be an ally for young people. As a straight person, I want to be an ally for LGBTQ people. As an African-American person, I want to be an ally for other cultures, for Muslims. As a Christian person, I want to be an ally for Muslims and Jews. That's who I want to be. But this takes work, because I got a lot of learning to do, and I got a lot of unlearning to do. And I started by, exploring my own implicit bias, by taking the Harvard implicit bias test. I'm gonna encourage you to do that. You'll be shocked. It just tells us how far we have to go. Let's keep going. So, are you ready? It's all of our journey. And I love this. It says, when she transformed into a butterfly, the caterpillar spoke not of her beauty, but her weirdness. They wanted her to change back into what she had always been, but she had wings. I was told from a little girl that I had wings. Again, when the world was telling me that I didn't count, that I was invisible, but my family told me, my teachers told me that I had wings. And can you believe that even at this age and at this stage of my journey, I am still spreading my wings? And I hope that my wings are growing and that I'm spreading them, and that my wings provide cover and shade and beauty and equity for other people. I hope you're ready to spread your wings and to think about your personal journey as you explore diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. I'd like to close with this quote. It's not our responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but we are not free to desist from it either. I could have said, I grew up during the civil rights era. I drank out of the separate fountains. I went to segregated schools, all of that. Been through this. Let the young people take care of this. No, we can't do this. This journey continues. As long as I got breath, as long as I got a voice, this journey continues. And I will not desist from doing my best to help to create an equitable world where everybody is valued and no one is invisible, and everybody can be their unique self, and we celebrate that. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Wow. Vicki is always so inspirational and incredible that I am so happy that she was able to join us today, even if it was through a video. So if you guys were able to jot down her information on how to keep in touch, We also, after the conference, will be putting out information in the next couple of days that includes information on how to contact our lovely speakers if you want to continue your journey with them. We have a little bit of time since we had Vicki's call-in. I wanted to open up, and are there any comments, questions, thoughts so far? I know that Vicki gave us a lot of great information to digest, but does anyone want to talk through a little bit of this?
Hi, Allison, it's Cindy. I just wanted to say I loved hearing from her. I loved what she had to say, love that she shared her story and her journey with us. And something that stood out to me of what she said is to keep the movement moving and figuring out like what our place is in that and just keeping it going. So I just, yeah, thank you all for bringing her in and making this available. It was great to hear from her.
I love that. One of the things I wrote down along the same line was, this is not a moment, it's a movement. And one of the great things that Francine helped us learn, who is our next amazing speaker, is that it's not the cultural competence that we learn in school, and it's not a checklist, and it really is more of that cultural consciousness shift. And how do we make this a journey? So great comment, Cindy. Thanks.
I agree with you guys. To me, it's very interesting hearing someone, especially a person of color, discuss how they used to be, oh, I don't see color, because that's how I was raised, is you're not supposed to see color. And now we're growing and learning, but that's not the way to handle it, that we need to respect each person. So I think it's interesting seeing a person of color and their journey going through something that we're all going through as well. Just trying to learn and figure out how everything is the best way to handle things.
Great thing. And it's tough because it's been what we've learned, and how do we incorporate that unlearning? And a big thing for me, and I was discussing with Rachel the other night, was, that transparency and saying, I'm not going to do it all right, and I will make more mistakes, and I'm going to continue to step into it, but help me learn, and please help me discover what I'm doing wrong. And I want to kind of walk through that. And if people are willing to help me understand that, that makes me better, and it helps me to be that better advocate and to have the voice that might be a change, or a change for good, but to know and say, I'm gonna mess up.
Can you hear me? This is Rachel Allison, Rachel Meyer, not Rachel Furman. Hi, Rachel. What I really appreciate Vicki talking about is diversity broadly, because I think, well, I'm half Filipino, half Cajun, grew up in Springfield, and my whole life, mostly, and even in like the last, 5-8 years, the conversation on diversity that I hear a lot is so focused on like Black culture or white culture. And it's so much more than that. And I love that, Vicki is able to take her experience as a Black woman, but also apply it to all the diversity that exists. And I think that that's so important. I think that it creates an environment where all people feel like their voice matters and their voice is heard. And so I really appreciate that. I love that she even brought it down to the level of like, I'm left-handed. That makes me different. And so I just really appreciated that aspect that she brought to the table on that.
Great point.
I loved that too, Rachel. And I think like along those same lines, how she was saying, how are you going to use your privilege? I think we can connect that back to how each of us are so amazingly diverse in all of those different ways, we all have privilege in different, that shows up in different ways. So, like she was saying, a lot of people are nervous to talk about that, but, even people who you would think of as not having privilege, like if they're part of a marginalized group, those people have, like, people who are even people who are in a marginalized group have privilege in different ways because they have different perspectives and experience and education that they can share with others who don't share that same perspective. So I think it's like on that same spectrum. Our diversity, the things that make us diverse, are also our privileges, or they can be.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
Absolutely. I mean, even something as, I grew up in a household with two parents that were college educated. That immediately gave me an opportunity that other kids maybe didn't have because they didn't have parents that valued education or had been able to have that experience to share with their kids. I was just talking to someone about this the other day, and she actually pointed out to me, she was like, you grew up with two parents who are college educated, and that's a form of privilege that you had in your life. And I'm like, oh, that is so good. I'm going to note that for myself, because I think, yeah, like Cindy said, we all have our privilege in our life that, sometimes we need to check it and realize that, we've had opportunity that others maybe haven't because of whatever reason, fill in the blank.
And I love that shift that you guys are mentioning, that it's almost empowering to say, maybe what has been exclusionary or holding us back in the past is something that we can use for good. So like with my disability, it might not be as noticeable as someone who uses a wheelchair, but that I can, as a member of that community, use that to bring change and awareness, and starting to shift what we might not acknowledge and bring to the forefront and use that as a powerful tool is so cool.
Hi, Allison, this is Krista. I really appreciated the generational aspect. I joke around and I say, I don't have children, I have boomers, because I am very involved with my mother and my aunt, who are both baby boomers. And they are Puerto Rican and white and raised in West Texas. And so they very much grew up with white privilege because they passed as white and didn't have access to their Puerto Rican culture and community because of poverty and access in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. Like, there was not an inexpensive way to participate or be involved. And so they never explored or had access to realize their full identity and who they are and what their family looks like and their family's experiences. But even we talk a lot about baby boomers and Gen X and millennials and Gen Z, and I appreciated that she was honest and open about what privileges she had and didn't have, and that it doesn't matter what age she is, she always has to learn. And that benefit, I also love the healing that she has when she didn't have a doll that looked like her when she was little, and to receive one now as an adult as a Christmas gift. Like, it's possible, and it's good that even if we didn't have those things as children, if they were erased or just we didn't have access to them, to be able to do that now is really quite beautiful and healing, and I think gives hope for everyone, no matter what your background or identity is. We can see those things and heal them and be able to let's keep it going. I know she was using that for the slides, but like, let's keep going, just felt it like a true call to action and a blessing all in one.
I love that. Krista, thank you for sharing that. That is beautiful and an awesome transition that I think it was kind of a natural finale for us for this session. So much of the let's keep going and let's keep improving and being better. So we have a short break so that you guys can get coffee. You can take a restroom break, check your emails. We'll meet back and start right at 10 o'clock with Francine, who I know will also dazzle us, and she's incredible as well. So thank you all for sticking with us. We'll see you back in 17 minutes at 10 o'clock. Thanks so much.
About, even as someone of color, some of what we've learned that we've had to unlearn, and as we even transition into where we want to be and being that voice, and however that voice may be. Some of us may have more of a direct voice, some of us more subtle, but no matter what, it's important for people to be seen as they are and also be heard. So taking inventory and making change. She talked to you about an individual. I'm going to talk to you more about the organization and how the organization or group can actually take inventory with some suggestions of some things that you can do differently. I have a long, enriching relationship with the Junior League of Springfield. It goes back to being the second executive director for Isabel's House. And as the slide presentation showed at the beginning, Junior League has many accomplishments in the community, and all of you should be very proud to be part of such an elite group of women. As serving as the Prosper Springfield Director, I do have oversight of the community's two goals. One is to reduce poverty, and the other one is to increase education beyond high school, which is also known as post-secondary educational attainment. For these two goals, I actually serve as chair of Springfield's Equity and Prosperity Commission that aligns with the mayor and the city council's focus on equity and equality. Co-chair for the commission is Tyree Davis IV, who serves as Springfield's Community Diversity and Equity Director. We'll share more about the commission later in the presentation. As we lead into this presentation as a group, and as an organization, I think about some of the comments that were made at the end of the last presentation of the valuing of diversity and what diversity means. However, I want you to take it up to that 60,000 foot level when you're looking at a group as an organization and all of those individuals that make up that organization. And when I look at the work that we do as leaders across the community. There are many, many different intersections, but when you start with race and ethnicity, you will see that the poverty rate in our community is highest for people of color. You will see that the unemployment rate is highest for people of color, and that post-secondary attainment is lowest for people of color. I point that out to make sure that as we're moving forward and we're looking at an organization as a whole, that we recognize where the barriers are the most and what needs to be broken down the most and what needs to be challenged the most, so that those individual intersections that we all fall into can actually move forward and prosper. And so now that you have an insight of that individual inventory, we're going to share strategies on the organization and group. As you know, the Junior League has been around for a long time. And it was mentioned that I spent the past year, actually a little over a year because of COVID, with the leaders by participating in diversity training, by conducting different assessments. And one of the things that I said to them, and I'm saying to everyone on this call, it's important to understand the history of your organization, because the organization, when it wants to strive to be more inclusive, you have to look at where you were. so that you're not ashamed, you're not afraid, but you have to address where you were, because a lot of that carries forward into what you want to become. And so you all know that the Junior League was founded in 1959. It was founded as the Community Service League of Springfield, and then it became an official junior league as a member in 1976. So understanding that, it's my understanding that there were 5 women who joined together to form that Community Service League of Springfield, and their vision then was to make a positive contribution to Springfield through their volunteerism and fundraising efforts. And so my question to you is, understanding that, and this is the same question that I posed to a lot of the leaders in the Junior League, who were the actual members of the Junior League of Springfield in 1959? What was the race and ethnic makeup of those members? What was the class of those members? Lower class, middle class, upper class? What were the other intersections that you were aware of back in 1959? Did volunteerism take place in any of those intersected areas? Was it taking place in racially designated areas? Did fundraising support the needs of any of those intersection areas or any racially and diverse communities? I'm not asking these questions to feel guilty. I'm posing these questions because what happens, any policies and practices that were developed and put in place would have impacts to your community as a whole if you don't take the time to reassess them and see where they started to see where they need to be now with where you want to go. I do know that after spending over a year with the Junior League and through diversity and inclusion workshops, I believe that they want an organization that is inclusive and that they are committing to an inclusive excellence model so that they can enhance what they do now and what they'll do in the future. So let's start with an inventory of how an organization can take inventory to make change. So I have a checklist for you. So we start with the individual assessments. The Junior League members that participated in the training, they actually did a diversity and inclusion assessment. It was a personal assessment. They didn't have to put their name on it, but what it did, it started a baseline for the organization to see where are we up here and where are we right here, our head and our heart. And that's important because your members make up your organization. And since they make up their organization, you need to see where are you individually so that you can have a starting point. If all of the assessments came up where everyone is right on point where they need to be, then there would be no need for me to be here or for Vicki. But it was a recognition, a realization that said, you know what? We want more, we need more, we want to do better. So that's the first thing. You take those individual assessments so that you know that starting point and what is actually making up your organization. The second item on that checklist is to understand historical practices. I just shared at a high level some questions to think about, but you know your policies and your practices even more. So you know what changes need to be made. What are those practices that are causing barriers, that are keeping people from joining, keeping people from staying involved? I know Vicki talked a little bit about bias. And so you do have to understand bias. We all have bias. I'm still learning through and dealing with and untraining things that I was taught growing up that have to do with bias. One of them, and this is kind of a funny thing to share, especially when we're talking about a subject that's so tense. Vicki shared of her being left-handed. I'm also left-handed. I'm the only left-handed person in my family. So when my kids were little and they were growing up, my last child, I decided that someone's going to be left-handed. So when he would pick up something with his right hand, I'd put it in his left hand. When he would try to eat with his right hand, I would put the fork in his left hand. Well, by the time he was in the 5th or 6th grade, and you all may remember the movie Edward Scissorhands. He wasn't sure how to hold his hands or how to do things. And I felt so bad because a bias of mine of just wanting him to be left-handed impacted how he writes today. And I can't read his handwriting today, and he blames it on me because I tried to convert him to be like me. And so I feel like I'm a good person, but that's a bias. So that just gives you a simple idea of how that can happen. So once you have your individual assessments completed and you have your baseline, you have an understanding of your historical practices, you have a better understanding of your individual biases, then you can actually start brainstorming what can be different. You can start looking at what are those exclusionary practices that as an organization we want to make better and make more inclusive. Remember, in brainstorming, there is no wrong answer. You're throwing everything out there so that everyone can see and no one's challenging anything that anyone's saying. It's so important to do that so that everyone can be heard and not shut down. So you throw all of your ideas out there, and then after you do that, before you start dissecting your brainstorming, you're actually going to use that to help lead you into actually creating SMART goals. But before you get to that point, we strongly recommend that you create a tiger team. And you may ask the question, what is a tiger team? Well, a tiger team is something that you create after you take an assessment of who you are, who your organization is, and who is represented. So if you have an organization and the bulk of your organization looks like you, has the same thought process like you, has the same background like you, if you're trying to do something different, it's going to be very difficult. So a tiger team is making sure that you have a group of people who you trust and who you can have conversation with that represent those players that are not part of your organization. So if I'm a predominantly Black organization and everyone from my organization is from the South, I may want to have a tiger team that has all of the other races and ethnicities on it. And I may want to make sure that they're from the East Coast, Midwest, West Coast. I want to make sure that there's someone who is a veteran, someone with a disability, someone from the LGBTQ plus community, someone who's male. I want to look at what's missing in my organization and creating a small team. Now, this team doesn't become another organization. It's generally 5 or 6 people that you can go to and shoot ideas off of and shoot thoughts off of to give you a different perspective from a different set of lens. And so that's what's important about creating a tiger team. Next, you want to use the inclusive excellence framework. And Tyree's going to talk to you more about that. Once you have that framework done, and you've done the other things that I shared on the other slide, this is your inventory checklist, then you're at the point where you can develop SMART goals. The reason why it's critical to develop SMART goals, if you just say a goal that says, we want to be more inclusive, we want to be more diverse, how do you define that you got there? How do you define that you really made a difference? And so if I want to say, I want the organization to be more inclusive, I want to be very specific. I want to make sure that it's measurable. I want to make sure that it's attainable and that it's relevant and that it's timely. And so you want to make sure when you get to this point that you're identifying no more than 3 or 4 goals. Sometimes I even say 2 or 3 for an organization, because for each SMART goal, you're going to have several task and action items that are going to help you lead to that goal. And by the time you do all of this work, and going back to something that Vicki said, this does not happen overnight. It's going to take time. You can't rush the process. You can't push people into the process. You can't push people into a space of where you want to be. It's going to take time. It may take 6 months to a year, especially with an organization that has 400 plus women. So after you do all of that, then you do the individual assessment again. And the reason why you do that individual assessment, again, you want to keep an idea on the pulse. If all that we're doing, all that we're building, all that we're learning isn't making a difference. And when I talk about that individual assessment, it's one that the Junior League has already done. They did, their leaders did, and it has to do with diversity and inclusion. And so every 6 months to a year, you want to take that individual assessment so that you can see where you're developing and where you're growing. The nice thing when you're doing that individual assessment and you have more members participating, that gives you an opportunity to see your growth and to see where there's opportunities for improvement. Those opportunities for improvement is where you're able to continue your training, continuing your growth, because this did not happen overnight. You want it to be a natural process that's something that goes on forever and ever. There's also, once you feel your organization is moving in a good direction, at least once a year, you want to do the anti-racist organization assessment. This is another tool that has already been given to the Junior League. And these tools, by the way, they're not tools that I created. It's best practices that have been used across the nation, and the owners of those documents are on those tools, so that if you want to get further information, these are folks who've been doing this much longer than I have. It's been researched, it's been validated, and it's a good tool to see, where's your organization at the beginning of this journey to where your organization is near the end of that journey. And so that is another tool that is available. So please remember, as I go into the next slide, that everyone does have bias. And after the next slide, you'll hear from Tyree. Biases are a function of how our brain works. It is not a reflection at all of our character unless we ignore them. Please remember that well-intended, upstanding, moral people have bias too, and bias is something that we always have to look at and check. And so many times it's influences in our early years that we don't even realize what has been trained up in us to understand what we have to untrain and get out of us. And that's where that transformation starts. So the next voice you will hear will be that from Tyree Davis IV, and he's going to start with the next slide, and then he'll do the second slide, and then I'll come back.
Good morning, everyone. As Francine mentioned, my name is Tyree Davis IV. I'm housed at Community Partnership of the Ozarks, but I am the Community Diversity and Equity Director, so I work for the community. But the 5 principles of inclusive excellence come from the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And it will take more than a 2-hour workshop. However, colleges, businesses, and organizations around Springfield are implementing the inclusive excellence model, and you will have an opportunity to identify what you can do for your organization. So the first of these 5 goals is clarity in language, goals, and measures, which is vital to effective, equitable practices. The second goal or principle is equity-mindedness, and it should be the guiding paradigm for language and action. The third of these 5 principles is equitable practice, and policies are designed to accommodate differences in the context of Junior League members' learning, and not to treat all Junior League members the same. I think that this goes into that equity versus equality picture, which I've seen that you've all shared or seen at some point. The fourth of these 5 principles is enacting equity requires a continual process of learning, disaggregating data, and questioning assumptions about relevance and effectiveness, which goes back to that SMART goal that Francine mentioned. And the last is equity must be enacted as a pervasive institution and system-wide principle.
Thank you, Tyree. Now, we know that was very quick, and we know that there is almost a 2-hour workshop that it would take to go over all 5 of those principles. However, in Tyree's role in the city, he is more than available to come back, to be available to ask questions to, and to help further define what those mean. for the junior league leaders that participated in the training over the past year, they had a deep dive into those 5 areas. And so they also have materials. So you've had the inventory list. The next phase is you're going to have to be able to teach and lead others, because you have 400 plus women that are in this organization. So, number 1, you're going to need to help the junior league members and those you are recruiting to join the junior league to see what's in it for them to succeed and improve. I know that the junior league has an effort to try to recruit more racially diverse individuals, as well as from different intersections, as well as from different backgrounds. So when you're doing that, it's really important to find out from them. There's a term called WIFM. What's in it for me? Why do I want to join your organization? What am I going to get from it? And so it's important to understand that not only when you're recruiting, but from your current members now. Understanding I may not look like you, I may not talk like you, I may not come from the same background, I may be of a different class, I may be with a disability. What's in it for me that talks to me as an individual that's part of an organization as a whole? Number 2, assure the current members in recruitment of new members that the junior league really believes in their ability to succeed. So understanding I may be different, what's the junior league going to do for me to make sure that I succeed? I understand there's opportunities for leadership, but what about someone who can only be a member? What's going to be there to make sure that I can succeed so that I can feel a part and I can represent this organization? And number 3, help the junior league members set several short-term achievable goals. This goes back to the SMART goals. And even though you're one organization, you do have different committees. And so maybe these are short-term goals with the committees. Maybe these are short-term goals with the individuals that are in the committees, or maybe they're even short-term goals for individuals who are members, but they're not necessarily part of the committee. Because then what you have is accountability and buy-in from everyone in your organization that leads to your mission and your purpose and your vision for what you're all about. And let's look at number 4. Make sure that all junior league members have something to do that they like every time they meet, with the focus on intersections of each member. That's big, that's huge, that's gonna take some thinking, that's gonna take some getting out of your own skin and your own lens and looking at it through someone else's lens. I'm going to use an example of an organization here in Springfield that has this big fundraiser every year. And initially, when I would go to the fundraiser, I would walk in, pretty much walk through the fundraiser, and I would walk out. It was an event that lasted for 4 to 6 hours, and I would probably stay there 15 to 20 minutes. Why? I wanted to support the organization. I believed what it was about, but I really didn't see a lot in that fundraiser that talked to me, that made me want to be a part. So I didn't go for years. About 3 years ago, I went back. I stayed the entire time. They had music that I liked. They had laser tag micro things that I'd never experienced before. They had selfie stations. They had golfing, they had dancing, they had, what do you call it? Corn toss, what is it? The cornhole toss. I don't do that, but that was there that other people really liked. And I mean, they made it a point to try to create an event that connected to anybody and everybody based on things that they liked. And it takes a lot of focus and time and energy to do something like that. And I'll tell you, with the items, the projects, the organizations, the things that the Junior League has done that I know about, I know you guys are more than up to the plate to be able to do that in some of the things that you do. And that's really key, because then where you've done this recruitment, and you've really gotten into your individual membership, now your individual members are not only seeing that they've been heard, they're hearing it, they're feeling it, they're being more a part. No, you don't want, I've seen people do things like, okay, well, we'll have this day that we'll do this, we have this day that we do that. Well, then what happens, only people are going to come for that day. That's what makes this so beautiful, because you can integrate it in anything and everything that you're doing, where it just becomes a day of life. And that's really important, which leads to number 5, empower your members to be part of the process. And I know there's a structure, I know there's a way that things have to be done, because that's always the case. But even within that, you can make sure that every person is part of that process, which is really critical. These are the characteristics of most successful companies. And it really comes into play whether you're an organization or a group. Strength-based, empowered, mission-driven. They focus on each person's strength. They recruit people that are not like them, but people that provide a strength that is missing. If your organization looks like you and has your same characteristics, you will not have as much creativity or someone willing to challenge you to think differently or to look at an issue through a different set of lens. Does that mean you throw out your organization? No, it doesn't. That means you utilize tiger teams, you utilize partnerships with other organizations in the community. You go into building relationships with entities and organizations before you start volunteering there. You build that trust, you build that relationship, you get that insight. And so it gives you many, many opportunities to do that. And so at this time, I want to open it up for questioning, and then we will move on. I'm going to take this down so I can see everybody. All right. Questions?
Hi, Francine. This is Krista. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Krista.
So what is the one thing that you think that each individual person can start with to really, like, talking about those individual goals? What would be some beginning steps that we can do that individual?
I would recommend taking the individual assessment, the diversity and inclusion assessment, if you have not done so. Because right away in that assessment, it's going to let you know how strong you are and where you have opportunities for improvement. And then once you do that, only pick one area where there's an opportunity for improvement and start there. Set goals for that one particular area. What we tend to do as human beings, and especially women, sorry, Tyree, but especially women, we try to take it all on because we have so much that we have to do as women and everything else that we intersect with, and our jobs and work and everything that goes with that. And then what happens, we fail and then we blame ourselves. But let's eat a cake one bite at a time. Do the assessment, find one area that you want to focus on for yourself individually, and try and measure where you were before you started focusing on that so that you can see where you were afterwards. And someone asked about seeing the assessment. Let me see if I can pull that up. Or let's see, I know.
It's me. So I was just putting, we can share it out. So we're going to send a packet after, and we'll share it.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, because there's other things that you guys want to get besides that assessment. You want to get the table about the anti-racist organization. And one of the things that I shared with the Junior League before I even shared that assessment, the anti-racist organization, that is not something you just share with someone where this is the first time they're hearing about diversity and inclusion, because it can be a huge turnoff. I mean, right away you can go, oh my goodness, no, I am not a racist. And that's not what the document is about. And so one of the things in working with the Junior League, this was something that we had to work up to. And then when they got to a certain point, I said, you know what, now here's the document to use to measure your organization as a whole. Thank you, Krista. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I wanted to leave more time for questions and interactive dialogues, because this can look different for each person, and this is going to impact each person, but I think it's important for each person to be able to hear. So I'm going to share something with you while we're waiting for others to be brave and ask that question. You can also use the chat. Vicki brought up how the Floyd murder, which we can legally call it that now, impacted her, and how it made her recognize that she had to use her platform in a different way. I bring that up because there's some situations that have happened here recently, and not just his, I can go down the list of innocent Blacks that have been killed, that I have realized how it has impacted me personally, and impacted me in a way that I did not realize it even existed down in me, because of some of my own biases and some of the untraining that I needed to do for how I was raised and in things that I was exposed to. And I'm sharing this story with you because not having those lived experiences, you have some people who want to reach out, some people who are non-Black that want to reach out as a friend, as a comfort, as whatever that is, to try and be an ally and be supportive. And what I recognize, if you don't have the lived experiences or you don't understand, you don't necessarily understand the space and time that's needed to process that. And so if you've attempted that and you didn't get the results that you wanted, don't give up. Don't say, I'm not going to try anymore. Give the space, give the grace, so that people have that time to process what's happened. How does that impact them individually? What are they going to do with it? How are they going to go forward? And so on and so on. And this has happened a few times here in Springfield, and that's why I feel kind of obligated to say something of, don't use that to say, well, I'm not going to try anymore. Because if you give up that easy, it wasn't in the heart in the first place. Questions, comments? All right. I am going to go back to, and Tyree, and anytime you have a question or a comment, let us know. We're going to go back to the 5 principles of equity, enacting equity. And so we're going to talk, since we have more time, we're going to talk a little bit more about what is meant by each one of these. So the first one, clarity in language, goals, and measures is vital to effective equitable practices. So Tyree, and I'm even going to put Krista Mankato on the spot. If you all want to provide any examples of what that means, and then I'll also chime in. So I'll start with equity in language, and you guys can think of goals and measures that are vital to effective equitable practices. So clarity in language. there's a language that's used right now that we're trying to move towards what's called more asset-based language. So if I'm saying that someone is marginalized or underrepresented or underserved, or that kid's at risk, or that person's homeless, or that person's a felon, how about if I change that to that child is living in an at-risk environment, or that person was previously incarcerated, or that person is without a home. So clarity in language is refining things that we've learned and used over the years to make it more asset-based. That student has untapped assets that have not been utilized yet versus underserved, or they're from the rural area, or they qualify for free and reduced lunch. How about those untapped assets that we want to make sure that student can get connected to? Tyree or Krista, and the reason why I'm picking on Krista is because she's in the similar role that Tyree is in with Community Foundation of the Ozarks. So do you guys want to talk on goals or measures with clarity for vital, effective, equitable practices? Okay, I'll go Tyree first, because then they're like, who? Okay, I was going to say Krista opened up first. That way they'll know who to go first.
I opened up to say like Tyree should go.
Sorry, my mute button. My mouse was not working. But when we look at clarity and goals, I think it is those, what Francine has touched on a lot, is SMART goals, and ensuring that they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and realistic, and also timely. And when we tie in goals with language and measures, it is an overarching theme of all three of those areas, focusing in on clarity so that they can be as specific and tying into your all's organization as a whole, so that you're not doing things, one-off. And it goes back into another principle of that pervasive system-wide principle, so that it is fleshing out the entire organization, and not just a checkbox thing. Because I think that in today's society, we've gotten stuck in a checkbox, which is not necessarily a good thing, because it can continue a cycle versus that pervasive system-wide principle as an entire organization moving forward with diversity and inclusion.
Thank you, Tyree. Krista, anything you want to add?
I was going to add that when you're doing this internal work on an individual basis, since Tyree spoke about organization wide, but when you're talking about a 400 primarily white women in a predominantly white area, it's very easy for us to go straight to the person of color or the LGBTQ person in our life and ask them questions. And you may have that relationship and that rapport, but if you make your entire relationship about them educating you on the things that they don't have and maybe you do, or the difficulties and barriers in their life that they've had because they have been othered, then that's not really an equitable relationship. That is that adds a different dynamic. So it's really important that you have people that you're on that equal footing to hold each other accountable. So for example, Tyree and I working together, we very clearly come from different backgrounds and have different families, but because we're doing this work together and we are also always learning, we hold each other accountable. And even though because we have some of that parity, that equal footing, our positions are very similar, we're talking about this all the time, if we're unsure of something, we talk to each other. And there's also things that maybe it's not appropriate for me to ask Tyree because I'm a white person and he is a person of color. And even though we are, like, he shouldn't be my first go-to question for every single thing that's related to the Black community. I should also have other people in my life that I can ask to check me and that they ask me to check them. So we hold each other accountable while looking at information that people of color or people with disabilities have already freely given. We don't have to expect that from the individual people in our lives and put that emotional labor upon them. So it's just as important for us to take in that external knowledge as it is, and to apply it internally, as it is to hold each other accountable for our asset-based language, for using the correct pronouns for someone, asking them what their pronouns are and then using them, or the name that they want to be called and not necessarily their legal or their legal name. So that is really the crux of it, isn't it? Like, Francine and Tyree don't need 400 white women calling them and saying, hey, can I say this word? As a person that passes as white and I have all of the white privilege, I am more than happy, and it is much easier for me to be able to take care of those kind of low level, very introductory things, and then save the big tough questions for people with that lived experience, and go do your research before you ask someone in your life and expect them to do that labor for you. So, and if you have questions about that or around that, then I know that Francine and Tyree are very happy to talk to you about that, and so am I. So feel free to use us.
Thank you, Krista. So the next question, I'm going to skip over equity mindedness. I want to talk a little bit about the third one. Equitable practice and policies are designed to accommodate differences in the context of junior league members learning, not to treat all junior league members the same. Now, I know over the past year, the Junior League has made, not just this past year, but over the past few years, they have made quite a few changes in policies and practices. I would like to hear from you all. What are some of those changes in policies and practices that you've been making and that you've made? And you can just unmute and share.
I think a simple one to share is that we move so it doesn't have to be an upfront payment. So we develop payment plans and have, like with this conference, set it so that there wasn't a cost. If someone wanted to donate, great, but that the financial obligation would not be a barrier for anyone, and opening things like this conference up to members of our community, not just to our members.
Awesome.
We also rolled out a new membership model where we no longer have requirements. So we used to, when you would join as a volunteer, you had to commit so many hours to volunteer, you had to go to so many meetings, and just kind of like a checklist is what it was. And so we removed that last year, and this is our first full year where no members have requirements anymore.
Awesome. See, I might consider joining now. No. Others, you guys have been doing a lot. This is a good time to showcase what you've been doing.
We also, and I think Rachel Meyer, if you're still on here, might have more background on this, but for our project proposals, when organizations submit project ideas to us for volunteers and grant funding, we have altered our application to ask them what they're doing to support diversity, equity, and inclusion in the community as well. And that was something we've never done before and just started this year, I believe.
Awesome.
But I would also, I just keep talking.
Oh no, go ahead. And tell us.
I would also love to hear about other organizations that people represent on this call and maybe like things they've done, because I'd love to learn and grow from other examples in the community as well.
Tyree and Krista, I know you've been doing a lot, meeting with different entities in the community. Do you want to share anything that you may have heard or learned, even if they're in the process? And I will share one and then I'll turn it over to them. Leadership Springfield has changed their application. They've changed, they've made their programming experience, everything is diversity, inclusion is a component of that, where it's becoming, excuse me, part of their process. And will they stumble along the way? Yes, but they're not giving up. When they do stumble, they admit it, they try to fix it, and then they get assistance from Tiger teams or people who would be in a Tiger team to keep moving it forward. And they have adopted the inclusive excellence model as well.
There are two organizations or two people in I guess there are organizations, groups that come to mind. Francine mentioned, I have been meeting with a lot of people. It's a lot of people, which is really good because it shows that our community is ready to move forward in these efforts. The first is the Council of Collaboratives through Community Partnership of the Ozarks. So there are a lot of collaboratives, around transportation issues, housing, food, so all of those collaboratives. So now they are starting to look at everything through a lens of equity. And one thing that stands out that I think a lot of people don't think about is equity that is really prevalent in Springfield is, like the north-south divide and how you go to different sides of the city and have very different experiences. So that group, we're in the early processes of that. So I'm very excited about that. And the other is the library. So they started a series called Let's Talk About It. So I'm going to be presenting on microaggressions in this summer. So it's really a kind of a tough talk, but it is an aspect where people who have questions that Krista and Francine talk about that have done the research, but they still don't know the answer to everything, which I help facilitate. I don't have the answer to everything. Francine doesn't have the answer to everything. Krista doesn't have the answer to everything, but we're in a work in process, and taking stumbles along the way is part of growth, not just professionally, but personally as well. So those were two groups that come to mind with that you asked about, Francine.
Thank you. And Monica, I believe she has her hand up, and then Krista, I'll come back to you.
Hello, I'm actually the board chair of Ujima Language and Literacy. It is an early childhood literacy program here in Springfield. And while we were on this call, I had gotten a text message from the treasurer of our board who uses a wheelchair. And we have a working board meeting tonight. And due to the fact that it's raining right now, she texted me and said, hey, is there a way for me, because she was planning to be in person with us. She said, hey, is there a way for me to be able to connect virtually or through a conference call or something like that? Because the weather, the way it is right now poses a high risk for a fall, right? And so I was just like, sure, if no one else, if everyone else wants to meet in person, then I'll do a conference call. But if there are others who feel the same way, then we will do a Zoom call, kind of like a hybrid model. And so just looking at providing more options for people to be included. And in this case, our dear treasurer who uses a wheelchair, I think that is something that, an example that we can always kind of be, as leaders, be thinking about how can we remove all sorts of barriers so that folks can be their full selves and to show up fully in the ways that we want them to. So, so yeah, thank you for letting me share that example.
And Krista, I'm gonna take Joanne Gentry and then you, since we haven't heard from her yet.
I just wanted to say I'm with the League of Women Voters of Springfield, and one of the areas that we are attempting to expand has to do with, of course, voter registration. And we're making a concerted effort to take voter registrations to locations such as affordable housing units. Rather than expecting folks to try to locate a place to register, we're going into those areas and providing that service for them. So we feel really comfortable and really good about being able to bring that important part of our democracy to them.
Thank you. We're gonna go to Krista and then Cindy Beecher.
I'll be very quick. I just wanted to point out that CFO organizationally, they adapted their non-discrimination policy to include sexual orientation and gender identity. They've also made, we have also made that, adapted that policy for all of our grant making programs. So whenever an organization applies to receive a grant from the Community Foundation of the Ozarks, they are also included in that non-discrimination policy, that they agree that they will not discriminate on the basis of race, sex, gender, class, political things, and sexual orientation and gender identity. So because we have enacted that policy as a community foundation, then that allows other organizations to make sure that they are aligned with the community values, and also that it gives them a reason to bring that to their board to adapt that policy if there isn't already another internal push. So if you want to use CFO's policy as your own model, then.
Awesome, thank you. Cindy.
Thank you, Francine. So I work with United Way of the Ozarks. And so similar to what Krista was talking about, of figuring out ways to infuse equity into our allocation process. So our way of funding organizations is a little bit different from CFO, because we don't make grants, we make annual allocations, like a percentage of our funding goes to a certain partner. And so we're really just, over the next 6 to 8 months, we are really focusing on changing up the way that organizations apply for funding, how they can become United Way partners. And so Krista, I will definitely be asking for all of those materials, and because that's one of the wonderful things about our community is that like our nonprofits are so collaborative and willing to share. And so I'm looking forward to working on that. And Greg Burris, our CEO, has really championed that, and I'm so grateful for that, because if you don't have the buy-in from leadership, it's just really hard to make those changes. And so obviously United Way is a really old organization. We've been in Springfield for 90 years. And so a lot of the things that we do are just things that's like, oh, that's the way we've always done it. And so we're really trying to break that cycle and just make those changes so that we can open up our organization to more nonprofits, hopefully, and then hopefully also raise more money because of that and be able to support our community better. So there's something that United Way Worldwide created they just published it last spring. It's called the United Way Equity Framework. And if you Google it, you can find that online, or I'm happy to put a link in the chat here. And so it's specific to United Ways, but I think any nonprofit could benefit from looking at it, because it looks at all of the different departments. And so for United Way, that's fundraising, and then community investment or grant making, finance, all of those things. And it kind of walks you through how can we apply a lens of equity to that specific area of our organization. And so we're going to rely heavily on that and work with our board and volunteers and staff to really just try to overhaul our community investment process and how we distribute funding and who we partner with. So yeah, along the same lines of what Krista was talking about, just kind of not forcing people to be inclusive and equitable, but saying, this is how we are. If you want to be involved with us, then you're going to have to play by those same guidelines that we are.
Thank you. So to wrap up this session, I would be remiss in not giving MSU their credit and props for bringing the inclusive excellence model to Springfield. MSU has been at this for many, many years, at least 7 to 8 years that I know of, and they adopted Dr. Damon Williams' whole theory on inclusive excellence. And shortly after that, the public entities established a diversity and inclusion work group. And that's your, the schools, the city utilities, the airport, the library, anyone that's a public entity. And CPO, I wanna say about 4 or 5 years ago, they adopted the inclusive excellence practice and policy, and it has just really morphed through their organization and things that they do in areas that they focus, and it becomes a living, breathing way of interacting. Junior League, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present. Tyree, thank you for co-presenting with me. I'm always here for you guys, but I love what Krista said. You're welcome to go to someone else to get assistance. Not that I don't want to be available to help you, but it is so critical for those of us who need to sit down and retire to help develop and groom the young professionals that are coming behind us. And the best way to help them develop is to use them as a resource. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Francine, and thank you, Tyree, also for being brave and coming into a group of incredible women leaders in our community. So we really appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge with us. Both of you are just amazing. And I'll be adding the United Way link to the resource list that we send out after to bring everyone up to speed. Tyree, Rachel, and I have worked on a resource list that pairs well with this training that has information about the personal journey, including the Harvard illicit bias that Vicki mentioned. It has information for organizations. That's where we'll add United Way. And then it has information about our community in Springfield so that we can all continue to grow beyond what we've done today. So our next presenter is Miss Cora Scott. Has she joined us yet?
I don't see her unless I'm missing it.
You know, she's planning on being here, so we'll give her just a couple of minutes. Were there any other comments or questions that everyone has?
Allison, I will send you the presentation that I did today so you can share that with the team.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to say goodbye because I have to go to Columbia. So thank you all.
Thanks, Francine.
Thanks, Francine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
So next in our presentation, our conference, will be shifting to the community aspect. We have several outstanding speakers to share for this final portion of our day. We'll be hearing from Cora Scott with the City of Springfield, and then we'll hear from the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights. And then I believe that we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions again. So it's been nice to have this feedback and interaction with everyone, especially with individuals of our community who aren't necessarily a member of the Junior League yet. So keep that in mind. If you guys are interested, we'd love to have you, but this conference isn't designed just to recruit members. So we want to continue partnering and figuring out ways that we can make our community more inclusive. And when we looked at our why behind why would we do this presentation, why would we have this conference, it was really delving into, we've done this personal inventory. We've learned about ourselves personally. We've done organizational work with Francine. And how do we start and continue these, the community work as well? So that's not to say that we're not on a continuum with the personal and organizational group. That will be what we continue to venture towards and improve on, and make mistakes, of course. But learning from those mistakes and using them to be better and to get better and do better. I'm guessing something probably came up for Cora, since she, as everyone I'm sure knows, usually has a couple of things going on. So this is such a great group of, we had such good feedback and comments earlier. So I want to open that up again. Is there anything, any thoughts that are weighing heavy? Any notes that you all have written down of things you want to do personally, professionally, organizationally, and or thoughts that anyone's having? Okay. We will take a little bit of a break. Let's just take 5 minutes in thoughts that, oh, there's Gloria for our 11:15. But let's take a 5-minute break, bathroom break, coffee refill or water, and we can rejoin. Hi, Gloria. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to take a quick 5-minute break. I think something probably came up for Cora. So we'll join back here at 11:08, and then we'll hop right into yours if you're okay with that, Gloria.
Yep, that's good.
Perfect. Thanks for getting on a little early.
But doesn't that make you feel a little reassured that they haven't forgotten?
Yes, and I love your pink. It's a perfect color. Great.
So see you in 5.
Thank you. Gloria, I hate to put you on the spot. Are you okay for us to get going? Great. Pull up my cheat sheet. All right. One of the ways that Springfield has done a great job was the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights and the city's inclusiveness survey. Today we are joined by Gloria. Gloria, would you mind pronouncing your last name for me so I don't mispronounce it?
Galenas.
Galenas. Okay, great. That's what I had thought, but I wanted to make sure instead of just assuming. Thank you. Gloria Galenas works as a professor at Missouri State University. She's also a member of the Mayor's Commission on Human Rights and Community Relations. She'll be presenting the results of the City of Springfield Inclusiveness Survey. And please help me in welcoming Gloria Galenas.
Thank you. And before I get started, I'm not a member of the Mayor's Commission for Human Rights. I help them analyze the data, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And I'm retired from Missouri State, so that gives me some freedom to be able to work on some projects that are interesting. Do I have the ability to screen share here?
Yep, you sure do. And thank you for clarifying. I apologize for
no big deal.
Completely messing that up.
Okay, let's see. Start from beginning. Okay, here we go. Okay, so at the time of the survey, this was the composition of the Mayor's Commission for Human Rights and Community Relations. Heather Hardinger was the chair of that committee. Carly Wanamaker was the vice chair. The purpose of that committee is to foster understanding among all racial and religious groups in Springfield and to provide recourse for discriminatory acts. So people go to the commission when they believe that they've been discriminated against, and the commission investigates. The commissioners represent all 4 zones of the city. And the survey was conducted in order to figure out what's going on in Springfield and what are some of the barriers to full participation. Why are people believing that they're discriminated against in Springfield? It was helped in this regard by Matt Simpson of the City Council, and Heather is now on the City Council. The survey was distributed in January and February of a year ago, and here's how it was distributed. It produced not a random sample. Even so, it was a reasonably representative sample of Springfield. So it was self-selected in terms of who participated in the survey. It was promoted widely on social media and virtual platforms. It was distributed electronically and on paper, sent to service clubs, nonprofit organizations. Members of the commission and city council distributed it to their contact lists. Individuals were encouraged to share the surveys with others. Postcards were sent out or were distributed at the diversity conference so that people knew how they could access the survey. The electronic version of the survey was easily convertible to Spanish, and we did in fact get 4 responses that were given in Spanish. Paper copies were available through the libraries, and Qualtrics software was prepared by Matt Simpson. Matt Simpson, who was then and continues to be a council member, did an analysis of the quantitative aspects of the survey. So it was pretty widely distributed, although it was not a random sample survey. Here were the questions, the open-ended questions that the survey asked. First of all, what do you think would make Springfield more inclusive? Have you personally experienced barriers to participating fully? Have you ever felt that you weren't valued based on race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identification, and disability and age? And these are the nationally protected categories. People responded about these, but they also responded about things that are not considered part of the national categories, such as class discrimination, for instance, and I'll talk about that later when I get into the data. Do you know someone who's experienced unlawful hostility or discrimination? Have you witnessed such an incident? Is there anything else you would like to share? What could Springfield do to encourage a more welcoming environment for all cultures? And the open-ended, is anything else that you want to tell us? So those were the basic open-ended questions that were asked about on the survey. 2,276 surveys returned. That's pretty good for a survey that you didn't respond to, saying that you wanted to get, cold survey that you're getting. There, as I said, reasonably representative of the community. There were Black African-American representation. The overwhelming percentage was white, as you would expect, because Springfield is overwhelmingly white, but there were Hispanic and Latino responses, Native American, and so forth. More females than males responded to the survey, about 60% versus about 36%. And there were responses other than male or female, primarily non-binary or gender non-conforming, transgender, or questioning their gender identity. In terms of age, the two largest response groups were 25 to 39 and 40 to 59, but there were younger and older respondents responding to the survey as well. And as you can see here, there were responses that came from all 4 zones of the city, and including outside of city limits. So zone 1, about 12%, zone 2, about 16%, zone 3, about 19%, zone 4, about 23%, outside the city, about 28%. So again, reasonably representative. There were quantitative and qualitative questions on the survey. Both are legitimate forms of data, and I'm talking about this because sometimes there's a suspicion that qualitative data isn't real data. It is real data, and it is also analyzed systematically in the same way that quantitative data is analyzed. So both are legitimate forms of data, and they work together to provide a more complete picture of any particular phenomenon, in this case, Springfield's inclusivity. The strengths of quantitative data are, they tell you how often, how strong, how prevalent a particular response is. But the strengths of qualitative are, they tell you what's the context surrounding it, what are the personal details, and what are the personal experiences that are producing the quantitative result. So they work together, and they're both important forms of data. In terms of the open-ended qualitative responses, the commission got more than 300 pages of open-ended responses. And that's when they came to me and they said, we don't exactly know what to do with these. Would you be interested in analyzing them? And I thought, yeah, that sounds like a very interesting project to me. I had done some work as a faculty member on Springfield's welcomingness and inclusiveness. And so I was very interested in the topic. So here's how I analyzed those qualitative data. I took each question separately. And what I do is read the responses to each question a couple of times. And when that happens, you usually can see 3 or 4 obvious categories of things that are jumping out at you. So I reread the responses, identified the major themes, and then color-coded the responses according to those themes, and then looked at what was left over and tried to figure out how they hung together. How can they be grouped in a logical way? So I identified the major themes and color-coded them all. Then I went back through for each question and identified the types of responses that I was getting. Either I was seeing them a lot, so people were saying, I was discriminated in housing, and I have no protection for that, so maybe I was seeing that a lot. Or if I saw a story that was particularly compelling and really seemed like it represented what I was hearing in response to that particular question. So I was looking for stuff that I saw a lot or stuff that was particularly compelling, and I copied those down. The report that I produced for that was over 130 pages, and very few people, unless they're keenly interested in this topic, are going to read through that. So and that was because I tried to provide a lot of examples that I was seeing in each of the questions, so that people could get a flavor of why people were responding as they did. And when I did that, I realized that was too long, so I condensed that and cut out a lot of responses and picked maybe the 5 or 6 most compelling responses. So the shortened report isn't a lot shorter, but it's about half the length, about 60 or 70 pages. And there is a link to the full report. I strongly recommend that if you're interested in this, you at least skim through the full report. It will give more examples than what I'm able to give you today. And I will, if you don't have that, I will send you the link to the full report so that you can get that and look at that yourself. So here were the quantitative findings. 52% of people identified Springfield as very inclusive, 12%, or somewhat inclusive, 40%. But 45% identified Springfield as not very inclusive, 32%, or not inclusive. And 3% had no opinion. So this is where qualitative data come into play. What you want to know is, okay, 45% of people are saying Springfield's not particularly inclusive. Why are they saying that? So here are some examples. And these are the types of examples that if you actually go to the link and look at the full report, you will see these fleshed out. So for instance, you're being told in a grocery store, if you're talking to your partner or your spouse in Spanish or whatever language, you're being told that you need to speak English. You're in the United States. Being called the N-word or damn Mexican in public. Being refused service in a store or at a restaurant. We were at a restaurant with our neighbor who happens to be African American, and he was the one who made arrangements for us to go to the restaurant. And they ignored him for a good long while other people were coming in and being seated. So I've seen that one myself. Being unable to find a wedding venue for an LGBTQ marriage. A gay man not permitted funeral leave for his partner of 7 years because they were not married. Physical harassment, having people throw drinks or rocks at you when they're driving along in their car, and you may be holding hands with a partner, you're LGBTQ, having somebody throw drinks at you. A transgender person being denied appropriate medical care. A number of transgender individuals said they have to go to St. Louis for medical treatment here because they can't find it in Springfield. A woman being denied fertility treatment because she's married to another woman. Children of color being punished more harshly for the same infraction as white kids. I saw that one myself. Had a group of students years ago that I took to Springfield Public School, and we were doing a service learning project there. And there was a little boy who, every time he went, he was punished in the hallway for stuff. When we watched, and we saw that he could do something that the white kids in the classroom would do, nothing would happen to him. As soon as the teacher saw him doing anything, she would send him out in the hallway. I did not point that out to my students. I thought, I wonder if they will see that. They pointed it out to me, and they were extremely disturbed by that. So it was obvious. It wasn't just a subtle thing that only the teacher would happen to pick it up. Perceived police profiling. There's a perception that Springfield police do profile on the basis of race and on the basis of LGBTQ status. A woman being told she can't handle the job because she's a woman. Women can't handle that. Real estate, being told to meet at a house over the phone. And then when you get there and the realtor finds out that you're Black, telling you that the house is not available, we're steering you to another part of town. Being told by a bank that you may be a transgender male and you've legally changed your name, but the bank will not change your accounts because we don't serve your kind. Transgender people being called it. Being denied birth control without your spouse's permission. This one was particularly egregious. A doctor asking a pregnant woman if her husband was Black, because when he was examining her, he thought he felt nappy hair in there. A biracial couple looking at a house for sale and having the current occupants pull a gun on them. People at a medical clinic asking not to be assigned to the Black doctor. Police being called because two same-sex partners were staying in the same hotel room. That's not illegal. I don't know why that was the case, but that was the case. Being pulled as the public face of an organization when the bosses find out that you're gay. At a garage sale, a Native American child being told that the dolls she wanted to buy were not for sale to her. Potential foster or adopters being discouraged from applying because they are atheists. So there's religious discrimination as well. Being fired from a job because you are gay or transgender, and restaurants who are not accessible, not easily accessible to those with wheelchairs. So that's just a smattering of the kinds of responses that are contributing to this 45% of people saying that Springfield is not very inclusive. So here are the key findings: that Springfield needs to have a more diverse population with increased minority visibility at all levels. So we need to have more visible minority representation in city government, nonprofit, boards, the schools, and so forth, every segment of society. There needs to be more diversity of all kinds. That includes race, ethnicity, age, and so forth, but also class, sexual orientation, and disability. The city needs to solicit and actually listen to the opinion of its diverse members, and more diverse leadership in all segments of Springfield society. That's government, education, healthcare, nonprofit, business, and organizations of all kinds. Education and training are essential to overcoming the prejudice and ignorance. There was support for designing opportunities for diverse citizens to get to know and appreciate one another. Things like festivals, events, food sharing opportunities, and so forth. There needs to be education about other cultures and ways of living so that we can develop appreciation for other cultures. And there needs to be support for helping the majority community know how to deal with comments and actions that are hostile or non-inclusive. So here are the recommendations summarized. A minority responses. This is really important to know. I was surprised by this because, you know, we all kind of hang out in our own bubbles and we think, well, most people believe as I do. And this one surprised me. There was a minority of responses who said increasing diversity is not a good idea. I don't think this group is reachable. They have decided that diversity is a bad thing. And we saw comments here about diversity is horrible. We should take all the minorities and send them back to St. Louis. Okay, don't think we're going to be able to do anything with a person who holds that kind of attitude. Here's the larger percent of responses here. And I do think that this group is reachable. These people said, I don't discriminate and I don't think others do. One of the responses here is a businessman. He says, I own a business. I don't discriminate in my business. Many of the people that I hang out with own businesses as well, and I don't think they discriminate. I don't think that there's anything systemic about this. I just think it's an occasional individual problem. I think this group is open-minded enough to hear what some of the stories are and to help reach the conclusion that in fact there's systemic racism that happens in Springfield and across the country. One respondent said, or actually several respondents said, but one put it pretty well, that we are putting the cart before the horse here. We have to explain why diversity and inclusion is important before we start looking at how we can increase the diversity and inclusion. Because this group doesn't think it's a problem, this group thinks it's a horrible idea. So we need to explain why diversity and inclusion are important. There is not going to be one silver bullet that fixes this problem. Multiple avenues of approach need to be addressed. So increasing minority visibility, having more occasions where people get together and understand one another, calling out when hostility and discrimination occurs. All of those things need to happen. So multi-pronged approach is necessary. All key players must be involved. So the key players, that includes the city and county government, the major institutions, the schools, the universities, the health systems, the Chamber of Commerce, the business community, the nonprofit sector, and the faith sector. All of those need to be working together here. There need to be strong statements of support for diversity and inclusion. There needs to be inclusive language in their bylaws and operating manuals and policy manuals. There needs to be a visible diversification of leadership and staff. Right now, there's a perception that Springfield is run by heterosexual white middle-aged males, occasionally women, but mostly middle-aged males. And so something needs to be done to change that. There needs to be leadership visibility at diversity events. Last night, I went to the Student African American Brotherhood organization. SOB had their sort of end of the year meeting where people, the chapters of the various universities and school system here were visible there. And Ken McClure was there, and Cliff Smart was there, and other representatives, Janet Stanker, other representatives of the city were there visibly at that event, supporting that level of diversity. More of that needs to happen in Springfield. And there needs to be accountability and transparency. So it's easy for people to conclude, oh, I didn't get that job because it was given to a white person and I'm a minority. Well, that's possible that that's the case, but it's possibly not. Maybe that person had better qualifications. So accountability and transparency related to leadership decision-making needs to happen so that people know why certain decisions are being made. So they can't then create a story about it happened because it was discrimination. Might have, but maybe not. One of the things that the group that gets targeted more so than anybody else is the LGBTQ community. And if you'll remember, a few years ago, for a brief moment in time, the Springfield City Council passed the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Ordinance, the SOGI ordinance. And then the voters came around, people decided it was a terrible thing, so they brought it to a vote, and very narrowly, that ordinance was overturned so that it is legal in Springfield to discriminate against people in the LGBTQ community. It is a finger in the eye of people from that community. It's really a sore spot there. So if we could do something to reinstate that ordinance, it was overturned by a narrow majority, very narrow majority. It's possible that time has come and attitudes have changed enough that it would not be overturned today. There needs to be a coordinated effort of the faith community. The faith community provides great potential for bringing Springfield forward in terms of diversity and inclusion. But right now, it is seen as one of the barriers to inclusion. Let me read you some of the comments related to what people have experienced with the faith community in Springfield. So a Jewish person being told, you're going to hell because you're not Christian. An LGBTQ person being asked to sit in a separate area of the church. An Asian woman having people at her church refuse to hold her hand during prayer. Being shunned when people find out you don't go to church. Being told you don't belong to a good Bible believing church. Being told hateful comments when people find out that you're Catholic, such as that all Catholics are cheats, liars, and drunks. A company, a profit-making company, requiring a Christian prayer at the start of meetings and hiring on that basis. So if you are uncomfortable with a Christian prayer, they will not hire you. A company telling an applicant they hire only Christians. When telling someone that you are not Christian, being told to have fun in hell. Schools scheduling major events over other traditions, holidays. This happened a number of years ago at Equitable High School, where homecoming was scheduled over Yom Kippur. And the students, the Jewish students at school went and said, you know, we have a problem here. Can we reschedule homecoming? And the principal at the time left it open to the students, and the student leadership said, well, that's too bad. We're the majority. We've decided when we want to have it, and that's just too bad. That's incredibly insensitive. A school distributing Christian propaganda, and when they were called on it, shunning the person who called them out for distributing Christian propaganda. So the conservative evangelical Christian community in particular, as noted by the comments in the survey, is seen as a barrier to Springfield inclusiveness. So something needs to be done there, but at the same time, it's seen as having great potential for bringing the community together by having such things as pulpit sharing and educational events and supporting one another's activities and so forth, and traditions. Facilitated community dialogues. You need somebody who's qualified and knows how to handle these, but dialogues that help people understand one another's perspectives. And you need to know also that these are not universally supported. Many people in the survey said, wait a minute, you're just race baiting. If you're asking for community dialogues, you're asking for trouble here. We shouldn't be talking about these things at all. That's race baiting. So there's not universal support for community dialogues, although I personally think that that would be helpful if you've got somebody leading them who knows what they're doing. Education and training, especially for teachers, police, healthcare workers, and government workers. These folks run into general public members all the time and need to be particularly sensitive to diversity and inclusion issues. Celebrating diversity, festival events, and in some ways, this is the low-hanging fruit because nobody's going to argue about a festival. Festivals are fun, they're low risk. The people that come to those festivals are people who are kind of interested in diversity anyway. So you're grabbing the low-hanging fruit. It isn't likely to move the needle much, but it's certainly low risk and fun, and maybe would be an entree for somebody who would learn a little bit more about other cultures. Making intentional efforts to welcome newcomers. So when somebody is new to the community, making sure that you invite them, and not just to your church, invite them to your house or invite them to a service organization that you belong to or something like that. Make sure that the pathway is opened up for them to be able to participate. Economic and class inequities are not part of the federally protected categories, but they showed up in the survey. There are a lot of people on the north end of town who have the perception, and I don't particularly think this is true, but they perceive that South Springfield gets all of the resources. So they will point to things like the fact that there are lots of places in the north side of Springfield that don't have sidewalks, that there's stormwater runoff there, that there is more crime, perceived to be more crime there, that the South gets everything and the North is left alone. But it shows up in other ways too. So there are people who say, I would love to be on a board, but board meetings happen during the day, and only those people who have the kinds of jobs that allow them to break away during the day are able to participate. And there's a great deal of truth to that. So you need to, right now, you need to have a company that is supportive of your participation on a board if you are, for example, an hourly worker and just can't take time off when you want to take time off. So it's wrong to assume that those folks who are in those kinds of jobs don't want to participate. They do in many cases. It's just that the structure is set up to not allow that to happen easily. We need to consult with other cities that have been successful. A couple of people gave us websites, web addresses to other cities who have dealt with some of these issues, but they also gave us a caveat that said, be careful, you can't just import a program from another city to Springfield. You need to adapt it for Springfield's unique culture. And there needs to be accountability for those who violate the law or who exhibit insensitivity and hostility. And so here's where the majority community really needs to step up to the plate. There currently is not accountability. People don't report violations. For one thing, they don't think that they're going to be successful. Nobody's going to do anything about it. Or they're going to retaliate against me, so I'm going to make the situation worse. Or they're going to retaliate against the person to whom the discrimination happened, and that's going to make the situation worse. So nothing's going to happen, or if it does happen, it's going to be negative. Or I was so appalled by this, I was paralyzed and I didn't know how to respond. So I think considering something like bystander training, what can you do when you observe something that is discriminatory? How can you address it in a way that doesn't make the situation worse? Here, I think, given Springfield's demographic picture, this is the most important quote that I saw in the survey. Those that are making Springfield less inclusive will continue to do what they do until their white peers call them out and tell them to stop. Minorities cannot make this change. And that's exactly correct. Minorities have been telling us for years that they are discriminated against in Springfield. They've given us examples. They've been saying this for years. And many people have not believed that. They can't make the change on their own. There are not enough of them in Springfield, but there are enough majority people who are supportive and want to help. And here's where majority people can step up to the plate there. Here's some next steps. widespread dissemination of the results. That's what I'm doing here. Heather and Carly Wanamaker and I have made ourselves available to talk to community groups so that people understand what minorities are facing in Springfield. There needs to be a coordinated effort of the major public, private, faith-based organizations. I'm starting to see some movement in that direction. We presented to City Council back last fall, and Ken McClure is very supportive of this. He says this is an idea whose time has come. We need to be working forward on that. Bystander training, if we could figure out something that would help majority of people know how to address issues. City Council had listening sessions in October, November. Tough Talks, Lyle Foster and Leslie Anderson from Missouri State had been hosting a series of Tough Talks. I participated in one of them. The problem here is the people who attend those are people who are supportive of this generally. So we need to get to that great majority of people who don't believe discrimination is systemic here in Springfield and really don't believe that it exists very much. And then there was a citywide quantitative survey that was distributed back in the late fall, early winter, I think. A press release was sent out about that, and I have not read what happened with that. But the city manager wanted quantitative data to sort of back up what we're seeing in qualitative data. So those are some of the next steps. Are there any questions or are there any comments to the survey, to any of the results?
Hi, Gloria. This is Cindy Beecher with United Way. And I was wondering if there are any follow-up surveys planned on, you know, just how we're going to track this over time. How are we going to see the results of all of these efforts that different organizations are making?
I think that's a great question. The one specific follow-up I know is the quantitative survey that was sent out a couple of months ago, and I have not followed that. I don't know what's happened with the results of that, but tracking is important. The Community Foundation of the Ozarks, working with other organizations, has done a community report card, and that's sort of been tracking things like poverty level and so forth. And they were doing that every year, but they've concluded things don't really change enough for that for us to see any kind of difference. I don't know, and I don't know who would be responsible for that. It seems like the City Council might have a role to play, and maybe the Mayor's Commission might have a role to play, but I don't know.
Thank you. And that's a really good point. Maybe that should be one of the things that's included in the community focus report every 2 years, is just an update on our inclusion or our inclusivity here.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I don't currently think there's a category for that. That would be a good one.
I had a question. I work with Empowerabilities. We work with people who have disabilities, and I was kind of disappointed there weren't more comments from people who felt discriminated. And I wonder, with like physical barriers, if sometimes they don't think of that in a discriminatory.
Actually, Shelby, there were a lot of comments from the disability community, and I did not include them here. And one of the comments that we've gotten on this is that our focus, the Mayor's Commission's focus, tended to be on racial and LGBTQ problems, and the disability community was concerned that they would get left out of the mix. But if you go and read the report, you will see that there are things like hosting festivals that are not accessible, having difficulty with hearing devices not being available to people, various events not being accessible, sidewalks, a bus system dropping you off at a place where there's no sidewalk, and if you're in a wheelchair, that's really problematic. That kind of thing. So there were a lot of comments about disabilities being an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that, because what you're telling me is that I need to include more of those examples in there, because they're certainly in the report. Thanks.
Gloria, thank you. This was wonderful. Some hard information to hear, but definitely what we all need to be talking about. And if anything, it's more of a push for why we're all in this virtual space and coming together as a community.
If I send you the link to the full report, can you get that out to everybody?
Absolutely. We're sending a follow-up email with all the links and information to resources. So that's a perfect place to plug it in. We have one of them on there. I'm not sure if it's the full or the modified. So if you would include both of those, I'll make sure that they both get out to our attendees. That'd be wonderful.
Okay.
We do have Cora popped on for a moment. She said that she had quite a few things going on this morning, no surprise. So she had popped on and then had to jump back out to handle things going on in the city. So she will be sending me her content that she would have shared today, and I'll make sure to include that as well. The city's doing some great stuff, as they had also a finalist in the Director of Diversity and Inclusion role, who did kind of an interview with Cora, and it was phenomenal. He seems like an outstanding individual who I'm eager to learn more about, and am really hopeful for the things that Springfield has in place and what our future looks like to increase our equity and inclusion, not only in Springfield, but in all of our communities. Gloria, thank you again for joining us. To all of our attendees, thank you so much for taking the time to be in this space with us today. We've taken a personal, group, organizational, and community inventory and have found new ways that we can further our work after we leave this space. In the next couple of days, you'll be receiving an email with additional resources to aid in furthering your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Rachel or myself. We're the DEI Task Force co-chairs for the Junior League of Springfield. If you have any questions or would like to continue with any of these conversations, we look forward to hearing from each and every one of you and creating a more inclusive community together. Thanks so much. Have a great day.